Well, thank you all for coming and spending your Friday afternoon with us here. I kind of want to start out embarrassing a good friend of mine. I warned him I would. But anyway, to me, we have great royalty in the room. I don't know a lot of you people, and you probably have a lot of good careers and everything. But sitting right here is Ray and Judy Dewey, and they were gallery owners in Santa Fe for years, and I always considered them to be the good housekeeping seal of approval for the Indian art business and the whole art business, really, because Ray and Julie were involved in a lot of the museums and everything, handled a lot of great collections and a lot of great stuff. And he came to see my house last year, and I pulled out this wonderful early colcha that has the Our Lady of Guadalupe's on it, and it's in the show. And I showed it to him and said, "You sold this to me." He goes, "No, I didn't. I don't remember it." So I pulled out the receipt from his gallery in the late 70s when I bought it. And he goes, "You still have this stuff?" I'm going, "Oh yeah." It's kind of gets stuck with me. So anyway, so just in case you might wonder how I got chosen to be up here to talk to you all and everything. When I graduated from high school, I went to a little flea market with my older brother, and we were walking around, and I found a nice turquoise, this isn't it, but a nice turquoise and silver jewelry bracelet. And I just thought it was really cool. I was 18 and I bought it. And so I kind of had a few friends, and we kind of looked at the jewelry, and we started kind of thinking about it. And we ended up taking some trips out to the Navajo reservation, buying old pawn jewelry, and that was in the late 60s. And so by then I had a little store. I did some handcrafts, and I sold Indian things in it in Idlewild, California. And a traveling trader who heard that I bought jewelry came in, and when I was looking at his jewelry, was buying some stuff from him. He said, "I got to show you something." And he took me to the trunk of his car, and he had 7 old Navajo rugs. And I had been out to the res quite a bit. I'd seen new Navajo rugs. I'd never seen old ones. Now, I knew nothing about them. He knew less than I did. And so we brought him in, and we put around the floor of the store, and they looked so great. He saw how much I just really thought it accented the store and looked so nice, and he was not going to leave with them. And so he kept saying, "Well, I'll take less, and I'll do this." And I said, no, I don't really know what they're worth or anything. And so we carried him out to his car, and he finally gave me a price, and he left with my money, and I had 7 old Navajo rugs. And so I set to kind of find out what they were. So I started buying a couple books and going to a few museums and looking at a few stuff. And a friend of mine from the Idlewild came in one day, and I showed them to him, and he thought they were really cool. And he offered me as much for one, which wasn't my favorite one, for what I paid for all of them. And I thought, crap, this is a career. And so basically I tell people it ruined my life. And so I became a Navajo textile dealer and ended up moving to Pagosa Springs, Colorado, because I thought all those old ranches would have a lot of great rugs around them and everything, and ended up buying my first really great Navajo blanket in Pittsburgh, of all places. So anyway, in 1977, I bought a Saltillo Sarapes for a collection I was building called the Durango Collection. That was hence given to Fort Lewis College in Durango. At the time we finished with it, I did it with a famous, not famous, but very influential Durango family. And it was over 300 pieces. It was collected like a woven history book. Their coin or stamp book, we're filling in all the spots and stuff. And the value was about $3 million. It was over 300 pieces, so I didn't have to pay income tax for quite a few years, which was kind of nice. And so in the middle of that, I really started liking the Hispanic textiles. My partner was a 4th generation Indian trader selling Navajo rugs, and although I loved seeing the Navajo rugs, I really loved some of the Hispanic things. They were less money, they were beautiful in my eye, and they had interesting history, and so I kind of started collecting them and built a kind of nice collection. There was a book done in Santa Barbara for the Santa Barbara Museum of Art called the Saltillo Sarapes, and this was published in 1978. The show toured in 78, 79, came off the road in 1980. In 1981, I bought this whole collection, all about 28 pieces that this had, and that was the beginning of my collection. And so Christine Mather, who some of you may know, who did the book Santa Fe Style, she started working on a second book called Indigenous, I forget what the book's called, I'm sorry. Native something. Anyway, she wanted to come to my house and film my house, and so I said, fine. And so her and Jack Parsons, who was her photographer, came up. And so I decorated it all with Saltillos because I thought it may be different than all the other houses they'd go to in Santa Fe and stuff and film. And she walked into my house and she looked around, she went, oh. And I said, well, what? She said, well, they're all Saltillos, they're Spanish, they're Mexican. I'm going, no, they're woven by Tlaxcalan Indians, they're Native American. And she goes, well, it wasn't what we had in mind. I'm going, well, go have lunch, I'll change everything. So I had to take everything down and put Navajo blankets up, which I had plenty of, and so that worked out. But she figures as part of the story because she mentioned me and my Saltillos to a guy named Robert Bishop, and Robert Bishop was the director of the Museum of American Folk Art in New York City. And this was in 1988, and he was working on a quincentenary show for the bicentennial. I mean, a bicentennial, no, it was the quincentenary, the 500 year. And so Christine said, you should see this guy's Saltillos, they're unbelievable. So him and his curator flew out to see. They looked at the Saltillos. They were planning a furniture show, but the shipping of it, because they wanted it to tour 2 years to a lot of museums, and the textiles were perfect. So I got hired as the curator and got the job for it. And so in reading Jeter's in their recollection, they said there's probably 300 Saltillos in existence, half maybe in private hands and half in public hands. And so, Bob said, well, what are you going to do? And I said, well, my idea would be to go to every museum and every private collection I can and see them all. If we're really going to write something real about it, I should see them. So he said, God, that's a great idea. We'll help sponsor you. And here's a big stack of letters, and write any museum you want, tell them anything you want, and just go see them. And I go, okay. His curator wasn't that happy with the idea, but he let me do it. And so I started on what I call the Saltillo Trail. The next few years I spent going to every museum in the United States, Mexico, private collections, and seeing every one. I developed an analysis form based on, my real hero was a guy named Joe Ben Wheat. And he had taken a sabbatical in '72 to study Navajo textiles. He went around and toured every place and did all this stuff. So I really was following in his footsteps to go see all the Saltillos. But when I was done, before the show opened, I saw all 1,100 of the 300 that existed. And we photographed them, and we did in-depth analysis and everything. And I'm going to jump a little bit ahead, but I had all these files and all these things, and we researched every person that ever collected one. We did everything you could possibly imagine. And so at a certain point, I had a partner in the collecting business, and it always helps if you have a kind of wealthy partner to collect, I found. And so he lives up in Woody Creek outside of Aspen, and he one day said, can I see all those records of yours? Well, it was massive, like 6 file drawers filled with stuff. And so he took those, and he didn't have a lot else to do, and so he was a computer guy, so he digitized my records. This is one of our volumes. We have about 75 of these. This one happens to includes every single Whitefield Saltillo in existence that we were able to find. Every museum, every private collection, everything we could find. And so that's what it is. It's just filled with examples of all those. This is one of 75 books. So it came beyond a book. It's now a huge database, and what we'll actually do with it, we don't know, but it's pretty impressive. So anyway, that's what kind of qualified me to be here.
You're in.
Yeah, because I've seen more than anybody. And basically, we almost own probably more than anybody, too, I would think, at this point. So anyway, I just want to let you know that I really like engaging with the audience. And so I'm going to talk about several hundred years of history, several different cultures. And so I have to go kind of fast because they only gave me 10 minutes to do it. And so If you have a question, raise your hand. If I acknowledge you, I might not let you ask the question right there to let me finish a point. But I'd rather have questions during the lecture so we can really keep the whole group kind of focused on what they'd really like to hear about and what I may have just overlooked or missed. Okay? So please, don't be afraid to ask questions.
You've seen a lot. Do you have a good eye?
They're failing. I don't hear very well anymore. What?
I just was curious where your Navajo shop is on the Navajo reservation.
Well, we are, if you know, we're the four corners where the four states come together. Along the Arizona-New Mexico border is a mountain range called the Chuscas. They go up to over 10,000 feet. We are on the foothills of the east side of the Chuscas, facing east at about 7,000 feet. It's called Totolina, and that's an anglicized word. The Navajo word was Tohale, and Tohale, to is water in Navajo. Everything is to out there because everything has something to do with water in a drought area. So Tohale refers to the place where the water bubbles out of the ground. And so that is the largest spring site in northwestern New Mexico. And our post sits right at the site. It's a 6,000 square foot quarry stone building built about 110 or 15 years ago. Fabulous place. We have a beautiful private museum. It's like walking back in history to go to this place. So it is at the end of a dirt road. So you got to be a little adventurous, but everybody that goes there thinks it's fabulous. And so we have Navajo preference laws, which means all of our employees have to be Navajo. And so we've been out there, my wife and I, running it for almost 30 years now, and we support Navajo weavers. That's what we do. And so it happened to be the place where the best Navajo weavers lived. That's not an accident. One of our weavers won Gallup ceremonials 25 years in a row. She was unmatched ever in Navajo weaving. And we had a lot of really fabulous weavers, which we still did. And it's sad because being there so long, we've had to watch these ladies get older and pass away. And then COVID came through and took a whole nother swatch for us. So it's tough to keep up what we do, but we've really loved doing it. So that's a whole other hat I wear. Someday maybe I let Davison come and let me do a talk on our 21st century Indian trading. So anyway. So I think it really would help if we'd start just giving you guys all a little refresher course and maybe a few new facts on Mexican history. Mexico is our, nearest neighbor to the south, but most people, other than, shooting presidents and, revolutions and all kinds of stuff like that, a lot of people don't really understand a lot of what really happened in Mexican history. And so I just want to bring you up to a little bit up to speed in that. And so, we know that Columbus, looking for a shorter route to the Orient, bumped into this island, and all of a sudden it turned out to be a continent, and all of a sudden it became a very wealthy place for the Spanish. That was in 1492. In 1493, Columbus took a second voyage from Spain to the New World, and it was really consequential for what interests me because he brought, they say, a couple thousand sheep. That seems like a lot on ships that he was traveling on, so I'll reduce it to a couple hundred. I'll change a couple historical facts just because they don't make sense, but at least several hundred sheep. And they were what were called churros. Whether churro is a breed or not is a big argument amongst a lot of people. But we definitely know it was a derogatory word for sheep that had crummy wool. So they were really brought for food. They were not brought for their wool, specifically to the New World. There were no wool. There were camelids, in South America, and then there was wild mountain sheep that the fur was used by some Native Americans up in the northwest part of our continent. And so other than that, no sheep. So Spanish brought the sheep basically for food, but the climate was perfect, the food chain was perfect, and the sheep just populated everything. And so it came up through Mexico. They were brought up into New Mexico and proliferated New Mexico also. And so anyway, the first really true conquistador was Hernan Cortez. And he was really kind of the epitome of a conquistador because Spanish soon learned about this great Aztec empire, and they had gold and wealth and things that the Spanish really wanted. And so Cortez lands on the coast of Mexico on the Caribbean side in 1519. Now, the first thing he does is he takes his 200 men and he gets them on shore and he brings his ships out there and he burns his ships down. And basically what he was saying is we're gonna conquer the Aztec Empire. So there's no turning back, guys. We're going forward. So he starts marching inland and he runs into these kind of coastal mountain Indians called Tlaxcalans. And Tlaxcalans were subservient to the Aztec Empire. They were also weavers for the Aztec Empire. And so Tlaxcalans kind of figured out very wrongly that maybe Spanish suppression wouldn't be as bad as Aztec suppression. But they were way wrong about that. But so 10,000 Tlaxcalans helped Cortez conquer the great. So if you wonder how 200 guys conquered the great Aztec Empire, it was the help of 10,000 Tlaxcalan Indians. They came in real handy. And so there was a few chroniclers of Cortez's expedition, you know, people that wrote about it. And there's one real famous book, but it was out of a different book. I found a quote from one of the guys that was on the expedition that described the Tlaxcalans as being better dressed than they, the Spanish, were. And since the Spanish didn't think anything was better than they had, that's a very interesting comment to have made. So it tells us something. But mostly we only get these little pearls of information and wisdom. And having studied these Saltillos for 55 years, you can ask me a lot of questions and I'm going, I don't know. We really don't know the answer. Because they became such common garments, they became such commonplace that people didn't write about them, or we don't really know a lot about them. So I'm going to try to tell you what we think we know. So, let me see something here. What the hell? I love it, I can't even realize my own writing. So anyway, the Spanish started to colonize the New World. And they were particularly fond of, you know, all the wealth and minerals and everything that they got. But who came to the New World? Who in Spain came to the New World? And if you understand Spanish history, it's real simple. The oldest son in any family got all the wealth, period. So if you were a wealthy second son, third son, daughter, whatever, you could grow up in great wealth in Spain, but you didn't get any. Got enough to get along with. Hopefully your older brother liked you, because that was helpful. But so that's who flooded to the New World, because they were seeking their own wealth in the New World. So that's who starts out coming to Spain, or to the New World. And so the Spanish started moving all around in like I said, 1519, they conquered the Aztecs. 1531, an underling of Cortez was sent down to South America. He conquered the Aztec Empire, which was equally fabulously wealthy with gold and silver. So the wealth started pouring out of the New World to Spain. And so as we remember that the whole idea was to find a shortcut to the Orient, you know, the New World sort of got in the way. And so the way to get the goods from the Orient to Europe, there's only two ways that they did it before Columbus. One was overland, and as long as you had an empty wagon, you know, trains and stuff, and were going across through, you know, a lot Moorish and a lot of the other real treacherous lands, they'd let you go. But on your way back, when it was all full, you would be lucky to get back with your life, let alone all the goods you would hope to end up with in Europe. So that didn't work out that well. And so the other way was to sail around the tip of Africa, the Cape of Good Hope. And there, the prevailing winds blow you onto the rocks that are there. So it's a very treacherous way to go to begin with. And second off, you know, it wasn't controlled by the Spanish, and so they had to constantly fight people. So the idea that you could, you know, sail across the Atlantic and then hit this big island, we don't know. So what happened is in 1565, they set up what was called the Manila Bay Trading Company. We've always heard of the Manila galleons, but it was an amazing thing. And so what they did is Spanish gathered all the goods. They had conquered the Philippines. And they gathered all the goods together in Manila. And in every year in the fall, the Manila galleons would sail across the Pacific Ocean. And that was really quite a task because the winds were westerly. This is still a problem for sailors today because the winds were westerly. So to sail from Manila to Acapulco, which is where they landed to take stuff off, you have to sail all the way up across the coast of Japan and everything, then sail way up north. You can get easterly winds so you can sail over to catch up with North America. Then you have to sail all the way back down the coast. All the goods were taken off in Acapulco. They were hand carried overland through the city of Puebla, loaded back on ships in the Caribbean at Veracruz. And once a year, October 1st, the treasure fleets left for Spain. So Pirates of the Caribbean at Disneyland, that's all about the pirates that were after a great ship. They could pluck a great ship. And so those ships were loaded with gold, silver, wealth. The second most valuable asset that ever historically came out of Mexico was a little scale insect that lived on the noble cactus called cochineal. And it was the most fabulous red ever discovered by mankind, and it was the rage of Europe. And of course, the Mexicans didn't let the Spanish know what it really was. It was basically bug blood, but they didn't want them to ever know that. And so it became the second most valuable historically, going that way. So anyway, I gotta see this so I can see it. So anyway, the Spanish, just for a little more on Spanish, the Spanish set up this amazing class system in the New World. And so if you were pure Spanish mother and father, right, and you came to the New World, you were what's called a peninsular because you were born on the Iberian Peninsula in Spain, okay? If you were pure Spanish mother and father and you had a child in the New World, the Spanish king didn't really trust you. He thought somehow it polluted you. So you were forced to be a different class, and that was called a Creole. And so it's different than New Orleans. This is a different word, but it's the same word, but it's, and so they were not allowed to hold the highest offices in church, state, you know, anything. They couldn't reach the highest. You could work in a place for 25 years and you were way smarter to your boss, but you weren't going to exceed to the highest level. If the boss died, they brought in another peninsular. That's just the way it was done. The one thing that the Creoles could do and were allowed to do was own land. And so they sort of flocked up to northern Mexico and built these huge, huge ranches that were called haciendas. And the largest ranch in the United States still is, I think, the King Ranch. It's 2 to 3 million acres. The largest hacienda, owned by a family named Sanchez Navarro, which was right outside the town of Saltillo, was 17.1 million acres. So let's say these guys gained a lot of wealth. They were huge. They had tens of thousands of sheep, cattle, everything. And they were basically kind of feudal lords. They didn't always necessarily pay a lot of attention to Mexico City and what Mexico City wanted. They became very independent. One interesting thing they did, Sanchez Navarro, was to send all their kids to both Europe and to Mexico City to get law degrees. So they were very smart about how they fought the Mexican government and really fought for their place. And so it's among that group that were very, very wealthy, developed this really unique garment that we now call a Saltillo Sarape. And as we see them, they took 2 years or sometimes more to make, and the hacendados didn't care. You know, they just wanted the very finest thing that they could have. And so here is a couple pictures that I got. These are actually lithographs. This one is done in 1836. And here we see the Mayordomo sitting, and he wears what's called a manga in this particular thing. And this is his, he's the Constantado, he's the Mayordomo, and so he is wearing a Saltillo Sarapes. So they were worn by both of these guys. And they developed a really unique style of dress. And we see that style of dress in the center of the show in the gallery there. Here's another picture, another 1836 lithograph, and here's the Hacendado here. You see his Saltillo Serape down there. He's putting on what's called botas that are what are in a showcase there. And the companion for the China, or for the Charro, was called the China Poblana, and we have a few of a China Poblana outfit in there. And all I can say about these guys is Elvis had nothing on him. They way outdressed him long earlier. And so the king passed a group of what were called sumptuary laws. And in those, and they had to do with a lot of different issues that went on in the New World. I have two really favorite ones. And one is that they dictated that everybody dress within their class. So that way they could keep track of everybody and how to tax them. That was the main purpose of that. But you know, you had the Spanish marrying an Indian, and that's a mestizo. And then an interesting thing was the mestizo can marry a Spanish, and they're called a carrizo. A carrizo can marry a Spanish and be pure Spanish again. Literally, the Indian blood goes away. And the idea was they were being punished for having native blood in them, and since the conquistadors didn't bring women with them, the whole initial generation in Mexico were mestizos. And this is a way, because they felt they were being punished, this was their way that you could really get right back to being pure Spanish again, and that really affected your tax basis. And so my other favorite sumptuary law is that these guys got so much money in Mexico. And I don't know if any of you have ever been to Mexico City, but it's a phenomenal place. You walk down back roads, it's one mansion next to the other for a mile down that way, a mile down this way. They were fabulously wealthy. It's really was a phenomenal place in its day. It's kind of become Mexico more now. We don't think about it that way. But when they came to Europe to trade with the courts of Europe, they would dress outrageously, and they would have their garments embroidered with rare minerals, rubies, and done with gold and emeralds and everything. And the king said, you got to stop it, guys. You can't do this to us. You're outdressing us. So there was a law that ordered Mexican citizenry to dress down if they were coming to trade with the courts of Europe. So it's knowing these little tidbits about things gives you an idea about costume and about things that went on. So anyway, the Saltillo somehow develops probably around 1700 or 1750 as a fully realized garment. We have a couple of things we call prototypes, but we really don't know what the prototype was and how they picked up on this. Except that I have a beautiful prehistoric Ica textile that's a pre-Incan culture that looks just like a Saltillo Serape. So I always think it was an indigenous, and it's really a combination of indigenous taste and, you know, New World Spanish taste that developed this out. But whatever, they were very finely woven, very finely done. There probably were regional styles developed because we see all the different types, but we don't have a clue other than a few clues that we found where things were collected or things were possibly made. And so we have a little bit of that information, not nearly what I'd like to have, and I'm 55 years into researching them. So I guess I probably won't make it another 55 years, so we won't really know. So about a third, actually exactly 36% of all the Saltillos are the red vertical mosaic type. And I don't know if you've all been through the show or not, but we're going to try to go do that after. Go head over there when we're done talking, if you're not sick of me talking then. And so this is the first Saltillo I ever bought, I said got given away. This is the second one. I bought this in 1978. You want to help me, dear? This is my lovely wife, Linda, who's going to help me out. Now, she wove this herself, though, so.
Not a chance.
So there you go. You take that, I'll take this. So this is what's considered to most people really a beautiful, classic, what we call concentric diamond red vertical mosaic field. So this probably took 2 years or more to make. The color changes you see, it's what's done on it's made in what's called weft face tapestry. Okay? It's woven on a European style treadle loom in 2 pieces, joined up the center. You can see, although perfectly, it almost comes together. And so the idea of weft face tapestry is you have one color coming from one direction, you have another color coming from the other direction, and you have to interlock those 2 colors. That's the term tapestry. This textile contains about 2 million of those hand manipulations. Pardon? Well, it was the only sheep they had was churro, so there was really no choice in that matter. So yeah, it has to be churro. That's the only sheep they had. So, and so it was, so the diamond is the first Western yoke, right? They were ponchos, so it would have had a neck slot that's been sewn back together to view it as art. And then it has this beautiful, what we call a vertical mosaic field here, and just the amount of colors. But then, and then the field kind of leaves the, these are better in the dark, really. So anyway, so this, when it's worn, you can see how it acts the hedge. Now the funniest thing is these things are alive when they're standing still. You put it on a horseback and start dancing it, you see what the impression that gave to people. Just amazing. Now they are all, mostly 90% are 2-ply hand-spun cotton warp. So that means they spun the cotton warps twice as fine as they intended to, and they hand-plied it. And that was a prehistoric trait. The prehistoric indigenous tribes almost always used 2-ply hand-spun warp, depending on what the material was. But that's one thing that got adapted through the weavers or through the Spanish, we don't really know, but it's super fine. This is probably about 100 weft changes per inch in this piece. And so the reds, pinks, purples are all cochineal, and it's color fast. This is the color this thing was made. They're fadeless. And the indigo blue and green, again, are fadeless dyes. And then you have a little bit of yellow, and I say try to keep wool from turning yellow. You know, you can pretty much put a little, boil something and put yellow wool in it, it's going to get a little yellow for you. So this is the most common type. So most people, when they see a Saltillo, they would see one of this type. And so if you didn't see another one for 2 years, you saw it, you would most likely, since 2/3 of them or so are this type, you'd see one of this type. And so when I told people I was collecting Saltillo, they'd say, oh, Saltillos, you've seen one, you've seen them all. Part of the purpose of our exhibit is to make sure people never say that again. And we'll get that idea when we're looking at things now. So it's a little bit of original.
Were woven by that tribe?
Tlaxcalan Indians, yes. They were the weavers. And so we really have scattered, I'll get you in a second, okay. We only have scattered records of actually personal Saltillo. I found some in Sanchez Navarro records. They were taken out of Mexico in the early 1900s by a lady named Nettie Lee Benson. Nettie Lee Benson Library is at the University of Texas at Austin. And she carried 10,000 records from Sanchez Navarro's estate when it was breaking up, and they're now in the Nettie Lee Benson Library. And I spent a week there with 3 interpreters digging for information there. So we found one letter that was written to one of the head Sanchez Navarro Times saying, Seraperio Rosario has died, and we're going to try to get Saperio Rodriguez now to take his place and stuff. So it's names, but we really don't know anything about the particular weavers.
I'm not sure if you said how old that one is.
I didn't.
Okay.
Do you want to guess? This is about 1750 to 1800. And so they were made to last. That's all I can say, is this is like brand new, you know? So anyway, so that's the main type of Saltillo that we see, okay? And so I'm gonna bore you to death by showing you types. And when you guys have seen too many, tell me to stop, okay? So the next type that I'm doing here is a lot like that type in designing, but not in coloration. And this is a diamond center with a dark field. We used to call them purple fields, and this one certainly fits that. But then I went to the word purple-brown because some of them go to brown more, and we'll see a couple dark field pieces that do that here. Now I just call them dark field. So it has the same diamond center, this, not designed the same, but similar placed, and then same, and a fancy, this is a little more of a zigzag border, and then a beautiful mosaic field. And this mosaic field is really very interesting because it's three-dimensional. I don't know what you can see from back there, but you sort of see the designs going this way, don't you? Well, the design also goes this way. And if you could see it up close, it goes vertically. It has the same element with the same colors that goes vertically. So they're actually designing the field with three complete different design systems. And so the other thing that was really unique about these pieces is we can see this warp, had the ends of this fixed in Turkey, and so this is still left and needs to be knotted, but it's like the original is. They dyed the warps on these with indigo blue, and so it lessened the effects of wear. So when this would start wearing, rather than a white warp showing through, it was blue, and it's done pretty consistently on most of these dark field pieces. Again, we don't know point specific where these were made or by who they were made. We just know they survived. And so, beautiful, huh? And this, again, look at this. I mean, it just dances. You see them on horseback, and these things are just dancing. So, next is the white field. And they have the same diamond centers and the same pattern fields, but the field is white. And again, we see a variation in the design. We don't see the vertical mosaics in this type, but these have different types of grids, or what we call spot repeats. This is what we call a diagonal grid by the arrangement of the elements in a color range. You can see that. See, it's a four-directional. I hope I look this good when I'm 200 years old. Darn, I won't make it. So this is a really neat piece, and this piece is really fun because the guy that collected this was named Edmund Holloway, and he rode with Zachary Taylor during the Mexican-American War, and he collected this saltpeter while he was in Mexico. And his Mexican War uniform made it into the Smithsonian, was the best preserved one. And they had a big sale of Holloway stuff in Mexico, about, Jesus, must have been 30 years ago or so. And I got 3 saltillos out of that all were collected by Holloway in 1847. So we know this piece is made before 1847.
What about moths?
They love them.
So how did you keep it, if it's 300 years old, from getting moths?
I put signs all over my house that say no moths allowed. It works for the literate ones, but the illiterate ones are very problematic, and I blame it on their parents, is all I can do. No, I'm a lifelong curator. I always have to be careful of them, and yes, moths are really a problem. So, and I come up with my own ways to do it. The head bugologist for the state of New Mexico, my friend brought him to they started dating. He brought her to come visit me, and so she started asking what I do, and I started talking about what I do, and I don't want to get too much into all this now, but she went, "You're ahead of us." I said, "It's my money. I have to think about it in terms of money. They'll ruin me." So yeah, and you know, the best, and my theory is, which is kind of simple, if the moths could live on the sheep in the sun and in the air, they would eat all the wool. There would be no wool left on the sheep. So following that theory is how I got what I do. I put them in the sun every year. I put them out in the sun for a little while. Depends on what. She thought I was nuts. She went home and started testing it. And she came up with statistics. She said 45 minutes at 97 degrees will kill anything in an animal, in a textile, and pretty much do it for 6 or 8 months before they ever have time to lay eggs again and really come around to do anything again. Unfortunately, she got cancer and died, so we didn't really get to finish this whole project. But she, you know, she says freeze them, is what she told me. I go, "That's nonsense." And she goes, and all the museums do it. And they go, "What do you mean it's nonsense?" I said, and I love tell curators this, "You ever been to Alaska?" And they go, "Why?" I said, "Because it's frozen 9 months of the year, and there's 8 million bugs the other 3 months. So freezing them doesn't kill them. It kills larvae, it kills the insects, it does not kill the eggs." So it's a long story. I don't want to get too much into that, but.
None of these people could read or write. It was all inherited knowledge, right? They weren't writing down the patterns
Oh, no, it's right up here.
in their heads.
Yeah. And we don't know really the relationships between the weavers and the quote unquote maybe owners or something. We just don't have a clue about that. But obviously it had to be as different as human relationships are. I'm sure certain people were treated really well. Other people probably not so much so. But basically, if you had a weaver that could make you one of these, you wanted to take care of them. You wanted them to live and, you know, make you nice pieces. So here's a much finer, kind of spectacular white one. I have to show off a few things if you guys don't mind. But this one, I think, is just beautiful in its coloration. It has what we call a spot repeat design. Although it has the diamond center and the pattern border, it has a spot repeat design. And the diamond is spectacular. The coloration in this is just beyond belief to me. Questions, anybody?
Is that a white field?
Yeah, this would be a white field. I'm sorry I didn't say that, but.
I have a sense that I saw this in the exhibit.
Well, you saw a similar one in the exhibit. These are all different.
They're-
I just didn't want you guys to think that's all I had that was in the exhibit.
Yeah,
So we're type collectors. We like finding same one. And to us, everyone is so different. I mean, that's the thing. If I took this in there, you'd say, it doesn't look anything like the one that you saw in there. But it's the same type. So anyway, moving on. Now, you didn't see one like this in there. This is the only one like this that we've ever known. And I did a show in New York City on the Saltillos, and there was all these Hispanic textile gurus showed up there, and they loved this Saltillo. They said this was the pattern of the Aztec king, and they just had all these stories. I just kind of listened and knew it, but it's pretty neat, huh? Wow. And look at now, of course, I name all my Saltillos. So anybody want to guess what the name is? Hollywood Squares. And this one's kind of feminine. The diamond's kind of small, and the size is a little smaller. It doesn't seem like much smaller than what it was. So it was, you know, possibly for a lady. But just a beautiful one, you know. I just love this one. So anyway, moving along, we have another white one here. And this is another really fun one. And so this one is just 2 shades of indigo blue and white. Isn't that pretty? So this was collected by a guy named Rob Small. He was also writing with Zachary Taylor. And he wrote a nice long letter that I published in one of my publications I did. And he talks about how another small battalion was attacked by a group of Mexicans and they were winning, and fortunately they rode up on them and they adequately defeated the group of Mexican guerrillas that they are, this interesting thing to call them. And he said, I took from the leader a blue and white Mexican cloak, and my dear Amanda, I'm sending it to you via Sergeant something something. The letter is dated 1847. And he wrote a second letter, said, my dear Amanda, have you received my beautiful blue and white Mexican cloak? So it makes this really special because he actually describes it in an 1847 letter. So we're pretty much sure this is the piece. And it descended from the family. A lot of these things, because of my kind of impetuousness, I've bought right out of families that collected them in the 19th century.
Could you show the back, please?
Well, this one has a backing to protect it. A museum backing that keeps the bugs from moving into the back. I don't love it exactly, but it came with it, so I left it on. But basically, they're all exactly the same on both sides, yes. The weft face tapestry technique that was used by them creates the same image on both sides exactly. I guess we'll show you a few more of the backs of them, okay. You picked a bad one to ask.
Well, it was different on the back, that's why I asked.
Yeah, well, yeah, you can see it. Yes, ma'am?
Do you know what they used to dye the blue?
Indigo. Yeah. You know, Anasazis used indigo and dyed lots of textiles. There's a lot of them that came out of Anasazi ruins that used indigo. So we know it was a trade commodity coming into the Southwest because of the weaving before the arrival of the Spanish. And indigo is a really interesting dye. It's a fadeless dye. And all you ladies particularly know that, you know, purple and blue fades real easy. You know, that's just natural with clothing that you get. Indigo is an oxidation process. When it comes out of the dye, it's yellow. And within a couple minutes, it turns blue. With its contact with the sunlight and contact with the oxygen, it turns blue. And so the blue is permanent. It's fadeless. And so indigo is a dye that was used pretty much all over the world. But for the Southwest, for the Navajo, the Pueblo, and the Rio Grande weavers, it all came up from Mexico. It's a little bit of a warmer climate plant. And there's several varieties of it around the world too. So, we're there? Okay. Oh.
It looked like on the last one there was some stitching running along the length of it. So are these the full length of the loom, or are these?
Well, they were made on that great big contraction we have in the chapel there. And it's big. But mostly they were woven in only 2-foot panels because the weaver could basically sit still and reach from one side to the other side. So a lot of the textiles that came off those big looms were just 2 feet, and then they would join them together. And a lot of the Saltillos are that way. There are some, as a matter of fact, the next one I'm showing is made in one piece. There's a few of them in the show that are also made in one piece. The particular types seem to be made in one piece more than anything else. That may be a clue as to what the workshop was that did them or things. And we've seen ones that are almost identical to each other, so they know they're obviously the same something. Whether they're the same workshop, whether they're the same weaver, we really just don't know. You know, so anyway, so here's the one. And this is the next main type we're going to look at are the round centers. And so everybody says, oh gosh, they have a lot of Oriental influence. Well, excuse me. You know, I'm pro-Mexican Saltillos, and I say the Orient copied what was done in Mexico, and it's not untrue. Isn't that beautiful? And so that one, the poncho slit is still open. And you can see it's beautiful. And so this one's interesting because it has a concentric diamond center inside the circle. And so you know, in the history of Saltillos, which is very scant, there was a lawyer by the name of Ramon Mina who wrote an article for the archaeological magazine in Mexico City in like 1912. And he wrote, I came to research it because I read the article and I was like going, oh my God, where did this guy come up with this stuff? And so I researched him. Well, it turned out he did like 20 articles. He was like an expert on everything. He just got a little information and wrote about everything. So his information couldn't be too followed. But he wrote that the round centers came from San Miguel de Allende and the diamond centers came from Saltillo. So in 1950s, UC Berkeley hired a lady to do Saltillo research. Her name was Catherine Drew Jenkins, and she was pretty smart. She's part of what was called the Berkeley School of Latin Americanists. Her husband was a graphic designer, and so he drew a lot of the, drawings in the thing. And so this is something that we republished on Catherine. She was the first one that really did good work, and so we published this on them. They're available up front for their $75. There was just a limited number of them made. But and there's pictures of her in here, and a lot of her husband's drawings, analyzing. The warp is the foundation, just so we know. Weft is what is seen, hence it's the term weft face tapestry, because the warp's packed down and completely conceals the warp. And so the ratio of the diameter of the warp and weft and how many warps and wefts are used determines the angles on the Saltillos. And so they did a lot of work analyzing that and stuff. And so it's pretty interesting. And then I, for UC Berkeley, wrote an analysis of her analysis. She looked at about 75 Saltillos. I've looked at 1,000. So I had to. So they asked me to do it. I said, sure. I got it mostly written one summer. And so these are available, like I said, that's my commercial plug. And so I then got told that I was going to be edited by the head librarian at the UC Berkeley. I went, oh no. I wanted to cry. I mean, I'm a high school dropout basically, so, but, so I really had to be careful what I said about her. Because she's one of their darlings. And at one time she said every Saltillo she examined had white. And I said that was a nice thing to say. She didn't say every Saltillo had white. Every one she examined, she was speaking appropriately. And so I complimented her. I said that was a very appropriate way to say it, and when I said it. And then, on the other hand, she said the word always and never a couple times, and I super criticized her for that. I said, talking about Saltillos, you can't use the word always and never because they just don't apply because they're individual. So anyway, I called her a member of the Berkeley School of Latin Americanists, and the head librarian said, where did you get that, Mr. Winter? And I go, well, I read it somewhere. I didn't make it up. I promise I didn't. She says, well, I've never heard of that. So we're taking it out. I'm going, you can take it out, you can take it out. She calls me a week later and says, I found where you read it. It was absolutely appropriate. She didn't change a word I said because I tried to be very careful when I wrote it. And so anyway, just see, I just want to make sure. I made myself some notes, which I never do, but I just want to make sure I get to that. So here, we won't go over, but this is just another round center.
5
minutes? Oh, it's 5. Oh, okay. All right, 5 minutes. No, we don't. Let's just show them. They can get the idea of it. So this one has a vertical mosaic and a beautiful center with a one.
Just open it.
Okay, we're going to go till 7 now. Let's change the agenda. Yeah, this is a beautiful. It's huge too. It's huge and beautiful. I mean, there's not an ugly one in the group, really. Isn't that nice? So they're as individual as was the weaver, the intended recipient, and the relationship between them.
Did both men and women weave?
Mostly men. It was mostly, well, see, one thing that, the Spanish brought into the New World was what was called the guild system, okay? And the guild system was a specialization of labor. Columbus's father was part of the wool carding guild. That's who discovered America. His dad carded wool for a living. And so there would have been a person that would have, sheared the sheep, spun the wool, carded it, spun the wool, dyed it, and prepped it. And so those all would have been different persons. And then there was probably another person that did the weaving, and there was probably in a weaving workshop an overseer that kind of helped what went on. But again, we speculate about this because we don't really know much. The only thing we really do know is a Father Morphy, who was a Jesuit priest, was at a place called the Hacienda de Pathos de San Francisco outside of Saltillo in 1757. And in his journal, he wrote that there was two weaving workshops. So that was a curious thing to say. And that they weave textiles for use on the hacienda. And he mentions, jackets, blankets, bed things, things. And he throws the word in, and Sarapes. But there's no Mexican dictionary until 1850, so we don't really know what the word means. But he mentions it. So that's the first, 1757 was the first actual word in historical documents. You know I would know these kind of tidbits, right? And so that's the first known use of that word. But we really don't know exactly what he meant. We can assume it though.
Are there still weaving shops and Yacendalos wearing Sarapes?
Never been to Tijuana?
Well,
Never seen the guy with all the Sarapes on his shoulder?
Yeah.
Never been on the beach in Acapulco and they come up and they got 20, 30 Sarapes on their arms? Oh yeah, there's still lots of, and it survived. My interest is 18th and 19th, mid-19th century, till the synthetic dyes were discovered. The wools changed tremendously, and so it changed. And so that is a group of Mexican Sarapes that date to 75 to 1950 or so. After then, the kind of quality got pretty bad. And right now, they'll bring you a Serape that says, from some logo from, Ralph Lauren or something on it, woven into it with his logo on it or something. So, yeah, the weaving is still alive in Mexico City, but, they don't weave these anymore. But they did all through the late 19th century. I'll get you in a second. And I only have a few hundred of those, because I collect all the different regional styles. Those we know much more information about the regional styles. We know one's from Jalisco, one's from Oaxaca, one's from San Miguel de Allende, some from Saltillo. And so the Mayos, Tarhumaros in northern Mexico were weavers. And so we know the regional styles of those much better.
Did the regional styles come later and Saltillo is the origin?
Well, the weaving came later, and I think the regional styles developed later, but they were after a certain look here that you obviously see. So there was variations in what was done with that basic three-part design system. And those are probably regionally, but we just don't have collection information. What we want is documented, collected evidence, and so we have the very least of.
As I remember, you've got a Serape in the gallery,
Uh-huh.
1500s. And I grew up in one of those neighborhoods on the way in Mexico City.
Oh, you did?
Or you're kind of,
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
unbelievable.
It's unbelievable, yeah.
But I was researching with a guy named Raymond Woods at the University of Missouri about how the Mandan ended up with the corn they got. And they know they were trading with the Inca in pre-Columbian America.
Mm-hmm.
Did any of the alpaca and vicuña find its way?
No, it was pretty highly regarded, and so it was mostly kept for the wealthy
Was it?
people there. But we don't know. Yeah, and that's actually not a serape. That is what we called a manta, and so those are woven wider than long, and often were worn as a shorter thing on the neck, and that probably was made about 1600 or 1650, and that one has the iconography of the what's my word? Chaniserie? Chaniserie. So it has iconography of the Orient in it, and it has the iconography of the Habsburg double-headed eagles, so it's European. And then most of the design is jaguars and parrots, which would be Inca. It's made in 5 backstrap loom panels on an earlier indigenous loom. But the Spanish not only didn't bring women, they didn't bring their tailors with them. So when their first group of clothing started wearing out and they needed more clothing, they went to indigenous weavers to start weaving things. And so that's what that represents. But that had to be somebody pretty hotshot to get that thing. And that has some camelid fibers in it. Vicuña, alpaca, llama, those are the camelids. And so that's in there. It's mostly wool. But it's real interesting because it's made in fact 5 backstrap loom panels, but it has what are called lazy lines in it. And those, everybody says the Navajos were only ones that used them, but I guess the Incas didn't read that book. That told them what they were supposed to be doing. So anyway, you see in the field of it and stuff, you can see all the lazy lines. And it's very unusual because it's an indigenous loom. It's a Hispanic weaving technique that they brought indigenous features in. Those are very rare. I mean, there's only a handful of those that survived in existence. So I'm real proud of that little puppy. So anyway, here's a dark field, round center. Just beautiful. And I bought this in Odessa, Texas, from a lady whose dad was a big Southwestern textile collector. His name was John Byram. And Joan, his daughter, was a quadriplegic in a wheelchair. And they had had a house fire and most of his textiles. He would have been known as a great collector. We would have all known that name. Like we know Alfred Barton or, William Randolph Hearst and a lot of these names of guys that were big Navajo blanket collectors. He was a big one too, but most of his collection got burned. This one was hanging in the living room. And she said her dad always called it the banquet blanket. So guess what? It has a nickname. This is the banquet blanket. So. It's beautiful. You can't really see at the distance you're at, but it's beautifully finely woven. This thing's about 120 weft threads to the inch, which is amazing for weft face tapestry. I mean, a handful of Navajo weavers reached that when they did their fabulous tapestries, especially one named Daisy Togglechee reached that high, but mostly an average Navajo rug is 30 or 40. Some of the great weavers get to 60 or 80 wefts, but this is 120. So anyway, we won't. This is a beautiful one. We're going to pass it by. This is a fun one. I want to get through them all. This is a fun one because the collector that wanted this was from Texas. His name was George Seeley. And he wrote a lot of letters. Now, this George Seeley was quite an interesting guy. He goes to the Met, and he walks through the Met, and he goes home, and he writes a letter to the director of Met and say, yeah, I thought your museum was pretty good, but where were the Saltillo Sarapes? You didn't have one. Don't you know they're the best textiles in the world? Where are they? I love the guy. Goes to the American Museum of Natural History, writes the same letter. And so when I went and met George Jr., and he got my interest because his dad had the same interest. They had fabulous records of buying everything, and everything was just fabulous. And in the letters, he would tell all the dealers, he would come to Santa Fe, and the sons, he owned the Galveston Wharf Company, so everything that ever came through Galveston, he made money on. So he was a really wealthy guy. And his kids that were, 70, in their 70s when I went and visited them, they were really nice. I stayed 2 days and they let me photocopy all their documents and everything. And they loved it that I'd bought some of his things that the family had put up at Sotheby's. And so a couple of the letters, he would write to dealers and say, I really want a pink, you ever seen a pink Saltillo? I really want a pink Saltillo. I want a pink one. I don't know what it was about pink, but anyway, he found one. Here it is. I love all the oohs and ahs. And so this one has some bindings around it. Some grandmother did a nice little binding around it. And I think that's kind of cute. I don't want to take it off. There probably was some damage that would show, but it's just kind of a neat part of its story.
What's this one's name?
Pardon?
What's this one's name?
Pink.
Doesn't happen.
I don't know if I've ever remembered one. So anyway, we have the red diamond centers, we have the whites, we have the dark fields. We have a subtype of the whites is blue and white. There's a couple of them in the exhibition, and I didn't bring a diamond center because you can see one in the exhibition. I brought a couple. And then we have the round centers, and those are basically the 5 types that Saltillo's come in. We can put a lot of them in those categories. But we have another category. And when I curated the show for the Museum of American Folk Art, it toured the United States, by the way, for 2 years. And they had me come talk at every museum, except the Idle George had it for some months. But it was an unprecedented 8 months at the Textile Museum in Washington, D.C. It's the longest they'd ever done a show there, and they thought it was really fabulous. And they had me come do an all-day seminar, and then they had Teresa Archuleta-Segal, who's a leading Hispanic weaver, come and tell, and talk about the Rio Grande weaving and hers. And I'm going to tell you a funny story. A night I tell about slave blankets, I'm going to tell you a funny story about her that happened that day when we were there. But that, you got to come to my talk, our next talk, for that. So anyway, so the next category that I went there was what we call variants. Now this, I think, this sort of highly qualifies it, because I'm really, really happy to have any of you tell me why this Saltillo exists. Is that unbelievable? So there's 2 of these. We found 2 of these in all of our findings. And they're very similar, what we call multi-pattern. And so, people say, oh, they were salesman samples. I don't think they would have done this much work for a salesman sample, So, what were they thinking? But you see all the designs, all the different field types and designs that we've seen in all the other pieces. So they don't want to be left out anything. Even got pink ones down there. So go figure. I don't know. We're still just baffled by it. So here's another. So these are what I call variants, because they're unusual pieces, and they may have some explanation. But this is another one, and this is a type. There's a couple, 2-3 dozen of these in existence, and they have no centers, and they're woven short and very wide compared to other ones. But it's a type. I have a white one, I have a blue and white one, I have a red one, and this purple one, and I've seen in all my findings in museums, probably up to 2 dozen of them completely. So this is a beautiful purple field, but we don't know what. Might have had a specific purpose or something, because we see them so similar, but we don't really know what that was.
I was just wondering, the little design, like in the white, it seems to be repeated throughout all of them, that's sometimes really tiny.
But you talking about this or these here?
The one you first pointed out.
We call them hourglasses, because they're basically the shape of an hourglass. And so we have dissected all of these and used, and as Catherine Drew Jenkins did before us, and kind of identified and kind of named all the different elements in them. But that's just a simple hourglass, is what that is. And this would just be a simple zigzag. And then
No symbolism attached to the hourglass?
Maybe. But I would say that what meant something to one weaver and one owner would have meant something completely different to another weaver, another owner. I get a lot, I'll get you in a second. I get a lot of that with Navajo weavers. Everybody wants to know what it means, what's it mean? And so in my big book, I wrote a whole section on symbolism, and I swore I wouldn't do it. But I woke up in the middle of the night and I thought about it. I thought it was kind of cool what I thought. And I started writing, and I aligned it a little bit to numerology and stuff. But I kind of came up with my ideas of what symbolism meant. Well, I was kind of correcting it in the morning. I woke up and said, hey, this isn't too bad. I published it, so I must have thought it was okay. So I was in our little place where we live at the Trading Post, and a weaver came in, to sell me a rug. And I said, oh, great, well, I'll try out all my new theories on her. So I went in there, and usually you chat with the weaver a little bit. You don't get right to business. And so the weaver's sitting there, and she had a daughter that interpreted for her. She didn't speak English. And so I started quizzing her, well, why do you do this? And I asked what this design meant and what that design meant on the rug and everything, just kind of trying to get her to open up a little bit. And they're kind of standoffish a little bit. It's for them. It's not for you to know these things. she finally says to me through her daughter, "It means I did a really good job and I want a really good price." So I think she pegged it perfectly, you know. And I wrote the story in my book too, that's what happened. So anyway, this is another distinctive type. We have there's one in Mayac in Santa Fe that was brought from Oaxaca to New Mexico in 1860. And so this is a Oaxacan style. And we call it a foreshortened field. See, it still has the border in the center, but not side borders, and banded and designed end panels. That's how we describe it. And they have kind of unusual coloration. They're not as fine as other Saltillos, but this is from Oaxaca, definitely. And I found numerous ones documented that way. There's one in the San Francisco Museum of Art that was brought there from Oaxaca in 1855. Too. So we have pretty good information on that. And so often they have a couple shades. This one has a couple shades of reds and pink, but it has different greens and different colors. And so, you know, this would really have a little more, you know, Mayan influence rather than Tlaxcalan influence in its designing and stuff, especially this stuff here, which is really interesting. So, since we're at it, what? 10 minutes? Okay, I'm doing good.
Yeah.
Huh. So, anyway, this is another Oaxacan, but this we call a full field Oaxacan because it's almost a full field. But they didn't like to carry their borders around the ends. They always had banded end panels. But you see that again, this different shades of red, different shades of blue, different shades of kind of greenish and yellow and stuff. And so they're very distinctive in our eye. They also are the only type that uses single ply wool warp rather than hand plied cotton warp.
Is this natural dye still, this one?
Of course.
What are the dyes? I mean, they're so bright, some of the colors.
Well, indigo, cochineal, and you know, I said that try to keep wool from turning yellow. And then the green would probably be a bath. You'd probably dye it yellow and give it a bath in the indigo blue. But you know, these dyes are pretty fadeless. I mean, you see how beautiful they are, and they're a couple hundred years old. They were pretty good. And then so the discovery of the synthetic dyes in 1856 for silk and 1857 for wool became a worldwide billion-dollar industry. But it really screwed up a lot of textiles because the colors weren't fast, they bled, they had a lot of problems that, you know, when they first came out, they were real easy to use because you just had to boil some water and throw the dye in there and throw the wool in there and it turned a fabulous color rather than all the work that was done earlier. But it wasn't the revolution that it should have been. And now it dramatically affects the value of textiles that they have synthetic dyes rather than natural dyes. Sir?
Are there any dyes that moths hate?
I wish I knew what that was. But no, they definitely have preferences. Like we have this beautiful golden brown wool in our Totolina rugs that the weavers use. And there's only a couple ladies that have sheep that actually would produce that color. Very unusual. The moths love it. I mean, that's where, if the rug has moth damage, somebody will call me and go, "Hey, my rug got moth damage." I go, in that golden brown? How'd you know that? But they love that color. So they definitely do have preferences, you know. So, and the dyes may affect what color they want or not, but I've never seen that. I would notice it if it was something that was pretty consistent. So, good question, though.
So I have one question earlier, which was particularly about the blue and white one.
Uh-huh.
And then there's kind of a ornate, kind of yellowy colour that almost looks like a gold. So some of the designs are starting to feel like they've had a bit of a European influence in them. Is that
No, stop.
No.
Stop. I want to change the way of thinking. Mexico was the apple of the world's eye for 300 years. There was no port cities allowed. Nobody was allowed to go to Mexico. The world copied Mexico. I just like to change that around a little bit.
Even that
To-
one we just saw with the ornate kind of almost.
Yeah, it might resemble something else, but what it probably more resembles is a human being sitting at the loom creating something. And those were everywhere. But seriously, Mexico was the apple of the world's eye. There was so much wealth. Spain got so much wealth. There was so much gold, so much everything. And it ended up, I didn't get into that story, and I don't know if I really want to now with only 5 minutes left.
Something like that.
Yeah. I mean, you know, one big part of Mexico history is you know, we decided we wanted half of Mexico. So our wonderful government in Washington, D.C., that I'm not going to get political at all, decided that they'd send old Zachary Taylor, let's just march down to Mexico City, beat the shit out of all these guys, and take a half of their country. And we did a treaty, which was quite nice of us, called the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. And now where you're sitting became part of the United States in 1848 under the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. Let me throw a caveat into that story. If you think gold was discovered at Sutter's Mill a year later is an unusual coincidence, we knew the gold was there. That's why we. And the government hates to admit that, and it's been whitewashed and stuff forever, but we literally did that because we wanted California. And that's where the gold was. And so you think we miraculously got discovered as a coincidence, an amazing one. But here's the interesting part of the story. California became a state in 1850, shortly after it became a territory. What took 62 years for New Mexico to become a territory? Anybody ever thought about that and wondered why?
Too many Hispanos.
Well, that's part of it. Actually, slavery had a whole lot to do with it. And so if you come to my talk on slavery, I'll address that issue. And that's a huge issue. Kind of an unknown but huge issue. Navajo slavery was huge in New Mexico.
That was in Arizona too?
What?
And that was in Arizona too?
Wherever Navajos were, you know. And so it's another talk. So it'll be a real interesting story for you to come and learn about it. I have dozens of what are called slave blankets that we'll bring. There's 5 of them in the exhibition. And so, and one of them on the far end, which is the white one, is the best documented. We know who the weaver, the lady who escaped from Bosque Redondo, she got picked up out by Estancia, where the salt flats are, east of Albuquerque, taken down and sold into the Mazano Mountains to a family. And she made that blanket for the son of the person that captured her, and an anthropologist in 1938 bought that blanket from the son. So that's the best, what we call documented slave blanket that we know her whole story, but it was huge, a huge prolific issue. I'll tell you one other little tidbit. 1805, Fernando Chacon, the governor of New Mexico, in his report to the viceroy, the vice king in Mexico City, right, which all of the governors of all over Mexico had to do. When he writes in his report, he gets to the Navajo and he goes, oh my God, they're the biggest problem we have. They raid all of our villages. They steal our sheep. They steal our cattle. They steal our guns. They steal everything. And then they go back to their own land, and we can't go fight them up there. And so they're kind of free and they do whatever they want. He ends his tirade by saying, but the blankets they produce are the single most valuable trade item in our provenance. And I quote. And so that was 1805, and really the slaving started earlier than that, but it really heightened it because obviously if a Navajo blanket is the single most valuable thing you can trade or own, how much are the weavers worth that weave them? So, and I just want to remind everybody that 1805 was before they put heaters in pickup trucks. So if you traveled in the Southwest, you had to have a blanket because we have very unique climate here. We get 60-degree or more temperature shifts from day to night. So it could be a wonderful 30 degrees and you're really nice outside, but at night it's going to dip to 30 below. You have to have that blanket. That's why the Spanish had them. That's why the Navajos had them. That's why the Pueblos had them. Everybody had a wearing blanket. So let's see, we did this one, we did this one. Okay, here, yeah, well, I got a few minutes to get to my maxi, so how many?
2.
2 minutes? Okay, quick. Okay, this will be the real Reader's Digest condensed version. I just had to show this one, I just love it. Is it stapled together?
No, there's a pin on it.
Yeah, there's a pin on it.
No, okay.
Yeah. So this is just a wild one. We found a handful of these too. This is just a banded piece. And literally these are borders of other Saltillos. I've never seen another one like it. Not that there isn't one, but I'm still looking for it. Just beautiful, huh? I actually made this one myself. So anyway, I gotta make it really fast.
What year did they, Spanish actually learn that they could make fabric out of wool? Because you talked about.
Oh, immediately.
Really?
Oh yeah, well they did it in Spain,
Okay.
but they brought the sheep for food initially.
Yeah.
They had no idea, but they flourished in Mexico with the climates, and particularly in New Mexico, they just flourished. And so that's why we had huge, tens of thousands, herds with tens of thousands of sheep. It was a big industry.
Were they weaving with cotton before the Spanish?
It's all, we have to limit it to the only thing they had.
And that's it.
Yeah, so that's it. And they did use some other plant fibers and stuff, but cotton was the primary weaving material that we see. And a lot of those things survive in archaeological sites, so we can see. And there's fabulous textiles. There's some textiles from the kind of the border of New Mexico and Chihuahua in a place called the Dry Caves. And they are as fabulous of pre-Columbian textiles as you've ever seen, as good as anything that came from South America. But because of the climate condition and the funerary practices of the Native Americans, they didn't survive. So here's a handful of them that survives, and they are such intricately designed and beautiful textiles. So we know those weaving skills came all through South America, Central America, Mexico, and even into the Southwest. When I gave my collection to Fort Lewis College, I gave a pristine condition Anasazi manta that we had carbon dated 1285 to 1315 AD. And it was a full-size manta. It was only white, and it was super fine and pristine. And if you go up there, bug them and tell them you want to see it. So anyway, quick story. It's a long story that I'll make real quick. After Mexican independence in 1821, everybody wanted a piece of Mexico because Spain was kind of out of the picture, and so a lot of companies, a lot of countries, Spain, Austria, France, United States, invested in Mexico, poured millions of dollars into Mexico because we wanted that great wealth. Fortunately, the mines were shallow, and so they didn't really hold out. Spain got the better part of the wealth, but there was still a lot of other things. The great chocolates from European chocolates, those are from Mexico. The great chilies from the Orient, the hot great food from China, that's all from Mexico. There was fabulous things here. And so, anyway, everybody wanted a piece. People invested. As we all know, a lot of presidents got shot. They left office and everything. And so what was happening was the governments were investing in sometimes cases millions of dollars, and they shoot the president in a week. And so this guy would come and go, hey, I got that guy $10 million. He goes, well, go dig him up and see if you get it back. So it was happening consistently. And so Napoleon III decided that he was going to go collect the money that was owed to him. And the U.S. backed him, France backed him. He was French anyway, but Austria, and so other countries backed him. But they soon realized he wanted to do more than collect money, he wanted to take over the country. He gained reasonable control of the country by 1864. He put the brother of the Austrian king as Emperor of Mexico. His name was Maximilian. We've probably all heard this name before. It's a really fascinating story that I can't go into much. But even before 1864, the Northern European influence started coming in and taking over on the Saltillos because they were making for more Northern European taste. And we call those Maximilian period. And although Maximilian was only there from 1864 to when they, I always use the word assassinated, but they didn't.
Oh, they
Executed him in 1867, so he was only there 3 years. And when the Civil War was over, we invoked, France had taken over Mexico. We invoked what's called the Monroe Doctrine, which said there will never be any European, and remember our high school lessons, no European invention in American soils. And so we were a fine-tuned fighting machine at the end of the Civil War. And Grant invoked the Monroe Doctrine, and Maximilian backed out. Napoleon backed out and left Maximilian an emperor in a country without an army or anything to protect him, and of course they assassinated him. But he had a strong influence on the Saltillo, European influence. This happens to be my wife's favorite Saltillo. And this is a Maximilian piece here. Yeah, yep, she does. And so they started weaving these with what was called French floss, French European like fine thread. And so these are generally a combination of hand spun and fine French dyes. This is the date that you could be synthetic dyes mixed in with natural dyes. And you can see the French influence of all the floral motifs. Now, as we looked at all the rest of the Sarapes, they are all geometric, variations on geometric. So here you really start seeing that French influence, both with the fancy coloration and this. This is the best one, I think, almost. I can't really say that because of the silk one that's in the show. And that one was made, Maximilian, when he was in Mexico, ordered 2 Sarapes made, one for the Empress, and that's the Empress's, that was Napoleon's wife. The one in the show was made for her, and then we also, in our collection, which we didn't show, have Napoleon's, the one that was made for Napoleon. And you think that one's good? Woo! It's fabulous. So here's another one. Oh, by the way, I'll try. I know my time's up. Are you going to hook me off yet, or get one? I've been entered. Okay, great. Okay, good. Now I bought this one out of Germany. If you wanted to know where they came from, we literally shopped the world for them. I bought this in an Oriental rug auction in Germany. Fabulous Maximilian piece. And this really shows all the great French kind of tapestry influence on the Saltillo. Yeah, fab. So it's very intercultural kind of. So here's another one. And this was made for somebody, but I don't think the somebody that ended up with it liked the somebody it was made for. But so here. So I'll show you. So here's another beautiful Maximilian piece. And so, here, go this way. So this was made by Jose B. Andalone, but the B got erased. So it kind of been a son. I mean, we don't really know what happened, but this. So I basically consider the Maximilian period about 1855 to 1875, broader than when Maxi was actually there. But the French influence was there. If you ever have been to Mexico City, the Reforma, which is the main drag in Mexico City, looks just like Paris.
So that's woven, not embroidered.
It's woven, right? It's woven in. And here, it's embroidered out.
Mark, can you describe the emblem on the center?
Yeah, a lot of people ask that. Some people know and not. But the idea is when the early Aztecs left Central America, or really it wasn't really Central America. It was really, it was Guatemala and those areas. When they left, moving forward to find a place to settle, there was a prophecy. And the prophecy said that they would settle at a place that they saw an eagle fly over, eating a snake and landing on a cactus. And so they were camped right out of this great lake that is now Mexico City. It was a great lake. It got drained in the colonial period. And they were camped outside there, and the snake flew over and landed. And as you see here, it's on an island. He landed on an island. And so they built Mexico City on a lake. That's why it was so easy for Cortez to conquer them, because all he had to do was block the routes that went to the edge of the lake, and he just starved them out. It wasn't really that much trouble for him. And then during the colonial period, we drained the lake and made Mexico City. And so when that earthquake was there, one of the reasons it's so bad that it was just a sandy lake bottom. And so it had such a terrible effect on it. So anyway, this is a Guatemalan serape. I have several of these, but it's a real distinctive type. And this is probably 1880 or so. And there was a guy down there in 1890 named Gustav Eisen, and he took a lot of pictures of what he called Martoons wearing these. And so we have numerous pictures. And he brought a collection back. They were sold to Phoebe Hearst, William Randolph Hearst's father, and they're in University of California, Berkeley.
And that's not aniline?
Oh, that's aniline. This is late 19th century. And it's also plied yarn.
Okay.
But it has kind of a funny feature, but I'm going to show you with a different piece here. Okay. This is, I just got a couple more. I'll make it really quick. This is a very unique one because this is printed in the copy of the Saltillo. And it's 16 different color plates printed on two sides, cotton warp. So the warp did not take on any of the dye. The dye is still white. And so the Mexicans feel that Maximilian had these made. He was trying to come up with a way to make a cheaper Saltillo that the people could wear. 16 hand color plates on two sides would not have been that much easier than weaving one. It's a very, very fine piece. There's 15 of these probably in existence, probably with about 5. There's a few different borders, a few different fields, a few different diamonds in them.
They printed the front and the back?
Yeah, the front and back was both printed equally.
Can you screen print on wool?
What's that?
Can you screen print on wool?
Yeah, oh yeah. But probably roller print. We don't really know though. I mean, these things exist, but nobody kept any information on them. But the Mexicans really strongly felt when I did my show in New York City that they were definitely Maximilian, and you know, it makes sense. It's okay for me. Now this is a really unique piece. Let's try to keep this like this if you can. Here, you take that, and now take this. Okay, this is a very unusual Saltillo. There's only a light handful of these made, and it has a really unique feature. So let's show you here. So any of you that are familiar with weaving techniques at all, this is a double cloth technique similar to a jacquard loom. This could be jacquard loom. We just don't know. But like a double cloth coverlet or something, early American coverlet is made. And so basically there are two-faced kinds of weaves and things done. This is actually a double cloth, which means if you find a place you have enough material, you can actually separate the two pieces of cloth. So it's being woven in one color on one side and one color on the other side, and where literally the wefts interface is what creates the design. So very rare. But obviously they saw Saltillo. So, and this is indigo blue and cochineal red also. So it could date back to the 1860s or so. Okay. So anyway, this is my last piece, I promise, Davison. So this is a child's Maximilian Saltillo. Now remember, these guys had kids, and so I have a few of classic Saltillos, but this is a beautiful child's one. And I really wanted to, any way to dim lights quickly, not too much. I just wanted to show you guys something. So this is made.
Glows in the dark, huh?
Oh no, never.
In UV?
Go ahead. If you can. That's good enough. Is that cool? And so that is cochineal that is doing that. And it doesn't do it in the Saltillos made in Mexico, but it does do it. This is plied yarns. These are commercial yarns, European yarns. And what's probably, the term is phosphorescing, is the mordant that's used to put the dye in it. But isn't that cool? I can turn my living room lights off and kind of blow people away. They glow in the dark. So.
That's UV,
What's that?
ultraviolet.
Yeah.
Did they use uranium?
Yeah, it's radioactive.
Yikes.
So anyway, tomorrow night I do thing on Rio Grandes, and so we're going to cover the whole New Mexican Hispanic weaving tradition. And we're really proud of that because we're New Mexicans. At least a lot of you are, and we live in New Mexico. And so that'll be a fun lecture, and we'll do the same thing, talk a little about history and the history of the weaving and the wool and the dyes and everything, and then we'll go into show and tell, which is my favorite part of it.
What time?
4 to 5:30 again. And also, in a few weeks, in the first weekend in March or February. February, yeah.
6th and 7th.
6th and 7th, I'm doing 2 talks. One on Navajo and Pueblo weaving. That's actually, you know, those guys win, you know. I mean, Navajo blankets are the most highly sought after and most expensive in the world. Do we know what the record price for a single Navajo blanket at public auction is right now? Can you dream it up? $1.8 million. And there was one on Antiques Roadshow that everybody has seen that copy a million times. At that time, which was 15, 18 years ago, that was a $500,000 blanket, and it actually ended up selling for more than that. So it's pretty phenomenal.
What are these Saltillos worth?
It's not an economics class.
I know.
So, no, a fraction of that. You know, and that, you know, you can buy a really nice thing for $10,000, and you can pay more, and you get more, but you know, compared, and these are finer and 100 years older. So, you know, markets don't always deal with logic. But anyway, so in the few weeks, we'll be doing a talk on Navajo and Pueblo weaving, and I'll bring I will bring 2 Navajo blankets worth more than $1 million for you guys to see. If you've never seen one in person, they're fabulous. You only see them on your little screen on Antiques Roadshow.
How many threads per inch?
On the Navajos? Well, our weavers are the best weavers on the Navajo reservation and always have. And the finest piece I bought's been 130 wefts to the inch. But I really had to push that weaver to get her to go to there. And normally they do what they call tapestries. Tapestry was decided by Gallup ceremonials in 1950 to be 80 wefts to the inch. So it was a category so that you could compete in when you entered something there. And that's the Saturday lecture. On the Friday lecture, which only slightly backwards, will be on Navajo slave weaving. And we'll have examples and talk about that story. That's a really surprise for a lot of people. Navajo slavery. So thank you all for coming. We really appreciate it.
And a round of applause for Linda.
Yeah.
And you're welcome to join us in the London Research Center. We are going to spend a little bit in the gallery. If you want to ask Mark more questions, that is your opportunity. Thank you for joining us. If you have not been to the Couse-Sharp Historic Site, you kind of need to go.
Hey, Linda.